Do you want to stay more focused on the right goals in your life, or even just figure out what the right goals are for you? Do you want clarity? Do you want better work-life balance? Well, you're in the right place. Welcome to Success Through Failure.
Welcome to the Success Through Failure podcast, the show that reveals failure as your path to success. You'll listen to intriguing interviews with some of the most successful people on the planet and learn how their failures became a launchpad for success and how yours can too. Here's your host, former Division I All-American wrestler, former Division I head coach, speaker, and personal coach, Jim Harshaw.
Welcome to another episode of Success Through Failure. Today, I bring you Jamy Bechler. Do you feel out of balance in your life, like your family and your work are your priorities, but you don't have enough time in the day, so you're shortchanging them both? Not to mention wanting to work out more or do more of the things that you love. Are you easily distracted and you want to be able to stay more focused so you can lock in on the most important things that you know you should be doing? You want to be more consistent so you can achieve those goals that always seem just out of reach. Or maybe you feel like you just lack the motivation that it takes to get there. Or maybe you're just not clear on what the right first step actually is. Like every time you're about to take action, you doubt whether or not it's the right action or the right goal. I know the feeling. I've got a wife and 4 kids. I have a job, a rental property, this podcast, not to mention the inevitable challenges that just come up with life, like, illness and struggling family members or car trouble. I've got a lot going on. But when I was a Division I All-American athlete, I was completely locked in. I was focused. I was balanced, and I knew exactly what I wanted and the steps that I had to take to get it. But when I got into the real world, things got a lot more complex. There's just a lot more time demands. Like everything seems to be a priority. How are you supposed to figure out what's the right next step for you? Well, I've developed a system that helps you do just that. Find the balance, the clarity, the focus that you're looking for so you can take your life to the next level. So you can start seeing the dreams that are in your mind as realistic goals and have a plan to achieve them. I've opened a few spots on my calendar for free 30-minute strategy calls so you can take that first step toward the life that you've always dreamed about. Just one simple step, one small commitment that will give you huge results, a simple phone call that will leave you with a plan. If you want this life, if you want to truly have a breakthrough, claim one of the few spots open on my calendar, and I'll share with you the formula that has had people who I work with saying things like one of my recent coaching clients, Frank, who said, "My only regret is that I didn't do this 20 years ago." Or like Isaac, who said, "I love this version of myself the best, and I'll do anything to keep it going." I've got dozens more quotes like that. If you want to feel the same way, go to jimharshawjr.com/apply. That's jimharshawjr.com/apply. Jamy is a professional speaker, leadership trainer, and executive business coach who works with teams ranging from major corporations to the NBA. Before going into full-time leadership work, Jamy served for 20 years as a college basketball coach, professor, and administrator. When he hung up the whistle, he didn't stop coaching. He just moved from the locker room to the boardroom, and he now travels the country motivating people and coaching organizations on how they can build championship teams and cultures. He's also the author of the book, The Leadership Playbook. And as usual, for the listener, if you don't have time to listen to the entire episode, or if you hear something you like, but you don't have time to jot it down, make sure you grab your free copy of the action plan. Just go to jimharshawjr.com/action. Jamy, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Jim. It's great to be with you.
So we have a wrestling guy, myself, and a basketball guy, Jamy. And what's the first question Jamy asks me before we start recording? He says, "Jim, do you even know what?" Because we were talking about University of Virginia basketball, ranked number 1 in the country as we record this. And he's like, "Jim, do you even know what basketball is?" Like, I'm like, "Oh yeah, it's the orange ball. It goes through the basket. Everybody cheers, right?" So it's pretty typical exchange between a basketball guy and a wrestling guy. So Jamy, welcome to the show. Tell us a little bit about your background. Where'd you grow up, and kind of just sort of a 30,000-foot view of how you got from there to where you're at now.
Yeah, I grew up in the north in Michigan, and grew up. I hated snow. I hated the cold, and I vowed I would go somewhere warm as soon as I was able to and old enough. And so eventually, once I got out of college, I got married for 1 year, and I got married, and after 1 year of marriage, we moved to the South, and we stayed there for about 15 years in the South, and then recently we came back up north where it snows a lot, where all of my wife's family's from. But during that time, I was kind of dragging my wife around the country as a college basketball coach, and so I had a number of head coaching jobs. Mainly in the South and mainly at small colleges. And so we embarked along that life's journey of being a coach. And she was kind of a coaching widow for about 4 or 5 months during the winter time when I was involved in coaching full time. And
I know the drill.
Yeah, and you you almost become a gypsy for moving a lot, and then your wife, she has to be very supportive when you do have that job or wherever you're at, that she has to, it's tough on the wife. I know this isn't a 30,000-foot view, but it's really tough on a wife when you're moving around a lot because she has to keep making new friends, finding a new job. All those kinds of things where, as a male or as the husband, we're really, we're just so engulfed in our job and we almost don't even see that stuff on the outside because we're so focused on what we're doing with our college sports and our college athletes. But then I got out of coaching, went into athletic administration full time for a couple of years. Then decided I wanted to kind of toss a wider net and have a bigger impact, a bigger platform. And so I went into full-time speaking and leadership training and been doing this for about 2 years now. Was trained by John Maxwell and his teaching faculty, got my certification for John Maxwell leadership team. And so I can work on with companies and teams on John Maxwell principles and on his material. So that's been great. And like you said, I work with across the country with teams and all different levels from the NBA to college to high school. And I work with companies.
And I just want to go back to what we talked about how hungry we are for success as coaches, having been a former Division I head wrestling coach for just a couple of years. And so I had that experience and with that incredible drive that we have to succeed, especially when you're in a job that involves sports, right? Athletics. It's just that competitive, that much more competitive, I should say. But everybody listening to this podcast episode right now, they want to succeed. They want to crush it at work. They want to make more money. They want to get to the next level. They want to break through. And oftentimes that happens at some level at the expense of our relationships at home. I mean, any tips or thoughts or suggestions on that, on how to find that balance? Because it's not an easy thing to do. And I certainly think it's a, as former coaches, we kind of both know that in that experience. But what can you share with the listener?
Yeah, the sad part of that question or the sad part of that answer is that I had some very knowledgeable and wise people that I looked up to gave me great advice, and I didn't listen to them early on because I was in that quest to be as successful as possible, or what I thought was success, and I was almost a dog chasing my tail. I'm trying to do all this stuff to get me success, and at the end of the day, there's a lot of levels of success. And so, I might have been good. We might have won games, or we might have won championships, or I might have achieved some career goals. But was that at the expense of my family? Was that at the expense of my friends? Was that at the expense of, what we would call balance or life balance? And, I think one thing I would suggest is certainly you've got to know your why. And I know that, that's kind of a popular thing nowadays, especially since Simon Sinek, wrote the book and had the TED Talk about why. But I think you got to know why you're doing anything you're doing and what's the most important. And for me as a coach, I wanted to win, but I also wanted to really reach young people and I wanted to have an impact on their lives. But what would end up happening was I was having an impact on kids' lives, but I wasn't having an impact on my family's life, or my life wasn't getting necessarily better because I was always pouring out. So I didn't take time to become better. And I know this is a long drawn out, deeper answer maybe, but I tried to go for success so much, but I wasn't necessarily going for significance. And what I mean by that is, I think success is more when we reach our potential as people, or we achieve something that we want to achieve, maybe a goal. But significance is when we're helping others do that at the same time. So maybe we're achieving what we want, but we're also helping others to achieve what they want, and others to be better, and adding value to those people around us, and kind of leaving a legacy. And a lot of times we think of legacy as, what we leave when we die. But actually, legacy is what we can leave every time we leave a room. Legacy is everything, is something that we leave every time we interact with somebody. And so I think I was forgetting that early on, at least. And I got too focused on, okay, I want to win games. I want to win rings. I want to win championships. And yeah, we're going to help people achieve their goals as basketball players, but at what expense? And are we going to discard them when they're not performing well? Are we going to make this a business where these kids don't matter if they're my 15th man and I can recruit over them the next year? And so it took me a few years to really grasp that success isn't just about winning games, that success is a longer term vision sometimes. And success is helping other people maybe to reach significance in their life.
Jamy, I'll be honest, when you said you got to know your why, I imagine some of the listeners out there rolled their eyes and like, not this again, right? I've heard this before on other podcasts. I've heard this before on Jim's podcast. I had Peter Docker on, who's on Simon Sinek's team. I had Lee Martinuzzi on, who talks about the hidden why. And I've talked about it, and now you're talking about it. And it's like, yeah, you have to know your why. But let me ask you this, Jamy, why do you think so many people don't actually live that out? Like, they know that, right? Just like we know what kind of food that we should and shouldn't eat. We know how much sleep we should get. We know the things that we should do, but why is that something that most people just don't live their life by? I mean, they heard it before. It's a fundamental, right? It's a cliche. All the sports cliches. Like, I remember when I went from athlete to coach, I started using all these sports cliches that I heard my coaches saying over the years. And I'm like, wait a second, this is actually real. It's actually true. It's actually how you have to train. It's how you have to compete. It's how you have to live your life. But it's so hard for people to actually do that and incorporate that. Any thoughts, or how do we actually truly live that out?
Well, people roll their eyes and they get sick of it because they don't want to do it, because it's hard. I didn't want to do it.
It is hard.
I want to know how. I want to know 6 steps to be a successful basketball coach, or I want to know 7 ways to get the players to be more motivated. Well, if you're conflicted with your why, if you really don't know what your why is, or you know what your why is, but you're kind of resisting it. And that was kind of what I was. I knew what my why was. Early on, I knew I wanted to be a coach because I wanted to impact lives. I wanted to, make a difference in people's lives, and maybe not go to, Africa and translate Bibles, or, be a street preacher or something like that. But I thought that, I could be a basketball coach and impact lives through using the tool of basketball, teach life through the tool of basketball. And so that's what I wanted to do. But I was also conflicted because I wanted to win. I had, my selfish ambitions. I wanted to be a championship coach. I wanted to win. I wanted to be that guy that people looked to. And so I was kind of conflicted with my why, and I was kind of resisting my why. And it was easier to, use a new strategy or put in a new play on offense or defense than it was to really remember my why and then live that out. And one of the ways you live your why out for me was I have to make connections with players, and I have to really dig deep into their lives and take a deep dive, both in their lives and my life, where we are going on this journey together, and we're trying to make each other better. And that whether you're my first or 15th man on the team, I'm going to treat you with dignity, respect, and I'm going to care about you as a person, not just as a basketball player, if your shot's going in or not. And that's difficult to do because, the fans don't care about that. My bosses sometimes don't even care about that. They want that there's wins. They want that there's less drama. And that's the kind of stuff that doesn't necessarily directly lead to wins right away, and it doesn't lead to less drama sometimes. And so, you got this big conflict there. And that's why I think a lot of people roll their eyes or don't want to really dive into that, because it's really, really difficult. It's even like, this is probably not an apples to apples comparison, but in marriage, it's much, much easier on Valentine's Day to buy a card and some flowers than it is to take out the trash every day and be nice to my wife every day and be the husband that she needs me to be. I would rather just throw a how. These are 7 things that I can do to show my love. Well, the way I show my love is actually every single day, the way I treat her or the way I, listen to her, those kind of things. But that's a lot tougher.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, if you want to know how, buy a card and flowers on her birthday, on Valentine's Day, and these certain days. That's the how. But like, if you know the why, it changes everything. It changes how you go about the whole thing. It changes your mindset around it. And I wrote a blog post years ago titled "The Coach Who Knows Why Beats the Coach Who Knows How," and that's it. It's you can go and learn all the tools, all the tips, all the tactics, but if you don't have the why behind it, your ceiling is going to be a lot lower. And it's the same in any area of our life. And I think relationships, boom, you hit the nail on the head. I think that's a perfect example, because we all can get better at our relationships. We all can put people first more often than we do now, and that especially means spouses.
Well, and Jim, when I go around and speak to a lot of teams or coaches, I should say, or when I go speak at conferences to maybe athletic directors or coaches at these conferences, one of the things that we'll find is that they all want to know, all right, what's the greatest, latest offense I can run? What can I do to get my players to be better? My players are this, my players are that. They're soft, they're not mentally tough, they're idiots, they're not smart, they're whatever. Well, they're trying to make a quick fix. They're trying to fix some symptoms as opposed to fixing the actual problem that's going on. And you put Coach K's offense, you put Tony Bennett's defense, and your players don't believe in you, there's not trust there. If they don't know, like, and trust you, then it doesn't matter what defense or offense you're going to run, you're still going to have the same issue. And so that's what coaches or even athletic directors trying to build a team of coaches, they try to do that. We try to make quick fixes or this, I just read this book, and so we're going to do these 6 things, or we're going to start doing these 10 things from the Energy Bus with John Gordon or whatever. Man, great book and all that stuff. But if you as the leader haven't decided that I'm going to make a conscious effort to kind of change my mindset, change my mentality, and these things are great as a guide, but if I don't have even my the direction we want to go, if I'm not clear about that, and then I'm emphasizing that to everybody involved, then the how-to is not going to be as effective. And so I deal with coaches and administrators all the time with this kind of stuff. And I just bang my head against the wall because they don't want to see the bigger picture and how, none of their offenses or defenses or drills or any of that stuff is going to work unless they have players that have bought into them and that there's a trust factor. But once again, that's really hard to make a connection with little Susie or make a connection with Jalen, as a player, because it's just easier to, here's the new offense, just do it. Right.
Jim, you teach organizations about culture, having a championship culture. What does that even mean, and how do you do that? I think this ties right into what we're talking about, having your why and knowing your why. But what does it mean to have a championship culture, and how do you teach or coach or consult an organization to install that?
Yeah, great question, because culture is kind of a buzzword today. Everybody talks about, we got to have a better culture. We got to have a culture reset or change the culture. And most of the time, what they mean is we've got to put something new on our letterhead, or we've got to put up a new flyer or a new poster on the wall or a new saying. And even when you hear some of the great experts on culture or leadership or business, a lot of times they'll talk about, all right, if you do these are the 5 values or the 7, standards of a great culture, or whatever you want to say. And they end up going to values, and values are great. Principles are great, but that's really just a starting point. That's almost the why. Why? What do you really believe in? Why are you doing what you're doing? But it's so much more than that. A true culture is really made up of your daily decisions and how you're emphasizing, how you're reinforcing. And, everything that happens in your organization happens either because you emphasize it or you allow it. And so every business has a culture, whether we like it or not, whether it's what we want it to be or not, from an intentional standpoint, but unintentionally we allow a culture to happen. So, for instance, in a sport, you have a team that wins year in and year out, San Antonio Spurs, or you have the New England Patriots. Let's say those are easy examples. Or in men's basketball, you have Duke right down the road from you guys in the ACC, or even now what Tony Bennett's doing at Virginia in basketball. You have teams that have great cultures, and year in and year out, you see the same principles and values, but it goes further than that. You see the intentionality of the leader. So a Coach K is going to be recruiting mainly players that buy into that, but that also he then emphasizes that day in and day out in everything that he's doing. And so almost you get a recurring thing where the people in your organization are also reinforcing that because it becomes internalized with them. And so a culture, you have an organization. I don't know how many businesses I've worked with where the upper leaders, the upper management want me to come in and fix the middle management or fix the blue collar employees or the everyday employees. And the problem is that everyone needs to be fixed and everybody needs to be on the right page going forward. And so, and I learned this even early on, or I learned this when I was an administrator or even a coach. If I walk into the office and I'm kind of short or I'm kind of impatient with my secretary, then she's then going to be impatient with the people she talks to on the phone. And so no matter if I have a great quote up on the wall or I send out nice little emails every once in a while, my actual emphasis or what I'm actually doing day to day is causing more of what our culture is than those emails or that fancy little poster I put up on the wall. But a lot of times we just stick to those posters. That's what we think culture is we're going to put it on a new fresh coat of paint, as opposed to changing what we are on the inside and having something else come out of us. The way we treat people on a daily basis means so much more than any fancy thing we'll ever say. And we all have, Jim, you speak across the country and you work with businesses and you're at the University of Virginia and you've seen colleges. Everybody has a fancy brochure. Everybody has a fancy website. Everybody looks good on paper, but very few of those companies or people or organizations are actually living up to what those brochures or those catalogs or those websites always say. And so that's what your true culture is what's really going on, not what we see first. That's helpful. That's kind of our vision. That's what we want to be. And then what are we doing each day in and day out to achieve that vision?
What are the biggest pitfalls that you see leaders making, whether it's instilling a culture or just generally in leadership? What are some of the biggest mistakes or pitfalls they make?
Yeah, and this is fell right into what I have done in my career as well, is not taking full responsibility for what's going on in your organization, pointing the finger. So as a coach, it's the kids just aren't tough, or the kids just don't get it, or they just didn't execute, or we've got to get better. The players have got to get better, or in an organization, a business, we have lazy people. They don't work as hard as they need to. HR is this, or this department is this. It's always kind of pointing the finger and not taking full responsibility that whatever happens in your organization, you're either emphasizing that or you're allowing it to happen. And I think that that's the number one thing that I see, whether it's in coaching, whether it's in sports teams, or whether it's in organizations or businesses, is those leaders, or anybody for that matter, kind of shifting responsibility, shifting blame. Even a secretary, well, that's not my department, or a salesman, that's not my department. and they're not really looking at how their role fits into the entire organizational structure and how everybody can help one another. And you can always add value to each other. So no matter where you're at, whether you're middle manager, whether you're a salesman, whether you're a supervisor, it really doesn't matter. We all have a responsibility first to do what we can do to make things better, but we also have a responsibility to make that organization as good as possible. And it's not about who's to blame. Certainly we want to have honest assessment, honest evaluation, but it's not that, all right, well, I'm off the hook because, sales didn't do their job. Well, if sales doesn't do their job, we don't have sales. And so the business isn't going to make money. And so, yeah, I can say, well, it's not my fault. But when they cut back, I might be one of the people that are cut back, even though I'm in a different department. I've seen a great cartoon once that has a boat, and there's a hole in one end of the boat, and the people at the other, and the people where the hole is, they're furiously trying to get the water out of the boat, and the people at the other end are talking to themselves and saying, "Thank goodness the hole is not on our side of the boat."
That's great.
But we're all going to sink together, and I see that way too often in the people that actually write the checks to me and pay me. They're thinking that everything, the problem is everybody else, and that they're solving the problem by bringing in a consultant or bringing in someone to work with everybody else. Well, we all have to take a stand. We all have to contribute to making things as good as we possibly can.
Jamy, we've talked a lot about sports, and sports is always a great analogy. But when we were athletes, you could have a single-minded focus. You could focus on one thing, and that's kind of what we're talking about. But in the real world, we have dozens of things pulling at us, right? If we're married, we have a spouse. If we have kids, we have children, and that pulling at us. And we have, we want to crush it at work. We also want to be healthy. We also want to have fun. We also want to be growing in every aspect of our lives, and we want to make an impact. And we have all these things pulling at us. And at the end of the day, we feel like we've gotten 100 things done at 100 miles an hour, but we got nothing done, right? We haven't really advanced the ball. How do you recommend people focus on the right things? I mean, what are the right things? How do we identify what the right things are? And how do we get that locked in focus on fewer things that are the right things, as opposed to sort of spitballing and trying to get everything done?
Great question. And I wish that I have some solution, or I have some ideas. I have some answers. I wish I was great at following through and executing them all the time. Yeah. But we have to, our life is a lot like that old cliche of, how do we eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And so we know we want to eat this elephant, but we also need to chop it up a little bit. And we need to take baby steps or bite-sized pieces. And one of the things we do, I think, is we're so consumed with our to-do list and crossing off as many things on that to-do list. And we also have this like badge of honor almost, of the busier we are, or at least the busier we say we are, then the more meaning we have in life. We feel like we're more significant, or we mean more, we're valued more, or, we're more important. And I don't think that's the case necessarily. Now, certainly people will think, man, if you work all these hours, then you are, you're really important. And you see this in coaching. I saw this all the time. Coaches wouldn't want to leave the office. They're going to stay there as long as possible, even though they really weren't getting everything done even though they were not really doing some things sometimes at the office, they were just staying there longer. And so I say all that. I read a book years ago, and it's a book that has been praised quite a bit. It's also been criticized quite a bit, and it's by Tim Ferriss, and it's called The 4-Hour Workweek. And whether or not you agree with some of the principles in the book, and I've never known anybody to only work 4 hours in a week anyways, but there's some principles in that book that I like, and one of them talked about, kind of your to-do list, and you want to kind of shorten your to-do list but make it more meaningful. And there's a couple things that he says, Tim Ferriss, in the book, and he says, if you had a heart attack and had to work only 2 hours per day, what would you do? And I read that. And there's certainly more to it, but I got to thinking, you know what? That that makes sense in a way, because you hear these people, who were on their deathbed, or you hear these people that had a life-changing occurrence and they were like, I really saw what was most valuable. And so I read that and I'm like, all right, well, if I only work 2 hours a day, what would I want to get done in this day? And then he went on to say, if you had a second heart attack and you could only work 2 hours per week, what would you do? And then, if you could only, if you had to eliminate, 80% of the time consuming activities in your life, what would you remove?
Yeah.
And so those are some things that I started thinking about of, all right, if the only thing I did today, what was on my sticky note, I only got one sticky note a day, what would that be? And if I didn't get anything else done the rest of the day, would I still feel good about my day? And I wish I could say I do that every day, but man, it's been amazing the days that I do that, how I'm more narrow focused on what's most important for that day. And I feel at the end of the day that I really accomplished something, even if I only crossed off one thing, if there was only one thing on that sticky note, but I felt like, this is the one thing I had to get done today. And, you say that you still have that elephant there. You still have that big goal that you have to achieve, but you can think in your mind, or you can even write it down on a dry erase board. Like in my office, my home office, I have a dry erase board with stuff, the pertinent things I have to do today, and then what I need to do this week. And so when I get my thing accomplished today, tomorrow, I'm going to figure out what is it on that list of things for this week that I'm going to move over into today's category, or essentially put on my sticky note. So I've kind of taken that to heart. I wish I did it every single day as effectively, but I've kind of looked at it. What is that thing? If I only had 2 hours to work today, what would be that thing I would put in those 2 hours? And so it's amazing how many little things you end up putting off. And it's like, you know what? That really didn't affect me. That really didn't,
Right.
That really wasn't that big of a deal. And now I was able to play with my kid more. How many times do we work on something that's really small and really insignificant, and we tell our kid, oh, we can't play with you right now because daddy's working. Well, really, you're working on something that's stupid, that really doesn't matter in the long run. And that if you didn't do it for 3 weeks, it still wouldn't matter to anybody.
Yeah, my father-in-law told me a story about, he was in the Coast Guard for a long time, retired rescue pilot in the Coast Guard, and he's actually crash landed a couple of helicopters. I should have him on the podcast sometime. He's got some great stories. But he would always tell me about another individual that he worked with, and every once in a while he said, I don't know how much truth there is to this, but he's not a BSer, my father-in-law, but he said he would just take everything on his desk, his whole pile of stuff, and he would just wipe his desk clean, throw everything in the trash, and just start over. And you know what? It's like we that like gives like half of us like, heart palpitations just kind of hearing or thinking about that, right? Just deleting your entire to-do list. But if you did that, like life would go on. Like the important stuff would still happen. You know what the important things are, and we get so lost in the minutia. And I think you gave us some great tactics and great strategies there, Jamy. So thank you. Can you tell us about a time where you failed, Jamy? I ask every one of my guests this. Tell me about a time where you failed and you felt that hopelessness or that overwhelming self-doubt that comes from a failure, and then sort of the emotion that you have to go through, and how you move through that.
Yeah, my one of my big goals from a young age was to be a head college basketball coach by the age of 32. And I achieved that goal 5 years early. I was a head basketball coach at the age of 27. I was one of the youngest NCAA basketball coaches. I took over a job in Texas at 27 years old. And, I thought I had arrived. And certainly, holy cow, did I think I knew everything, though, because I was a good assistant coach and had learned from some good people. And I was a young head coach. So I obviously had the world by its tail and knew everything. The problem was I was in a terrible job. It was a good college. It was a terrible job. And I thought I knew everything. Well, we did not know everything. And 4 years after I had that job, I got resigned. So no matter how you cut it, I got fired. But, technically it's a resignation, but I got resigned. And when that happened, I kind of joined this huge club that's not very exclusive, the I Got Fired club. And almost every coach has gone through that. And most people have gone through that at some point, whether they've been downsized in their job or laid off or even not got a promotion, or got kind of demoted in their role. But so I got fired, and at first I didn't take it very well for a day. I didn't take it very well at all because I thought it was everyone else's fault. And even though, that program has been terrible in 15 years since I left, it's never been a good program. It doesn't matter. The fact of the matter was I didn't do what I needed to do to be the best coach I could be. I was a little arrogant at times, and it was disappointing, and so that was just a gut punch, when you get fired. And so I'm 31 years old, and I lost my job, and now what am I going to do? And fortunately, I had a good bit of savings. Fortunately, I had a lot of connections, but you know what? I went 3 months, I believe, without getting a job. And finally into July, I finally got a break and got a job, which was, a long time to go for a college basketball coach without a job. And so I was able to latch on as an assistant, and, and ended up having a great experience as an assistant again. I got to see things from a different perspective now. And I took a lot of those lessons from being a head coach, being a failed head coach, essentially, and was able to kind of learn and move forward. And as John Maxwell will say, fail forward. And so that was one of my favorite failures in life because it was so heartbreaking at the time, but it actually made me a much better coach moving forward. And I ended up having a pretty good career as a head coach after that. Won a lot of games, was nationally ranked, had a lot of memories, but I don't think I would have been as successful and been able to see things as clearly from a bigger perspective if I hadn't gotten fired at a young age like I had. And then even as an administrator, I was able to use that experience to help other people. And I've since written a blog post that Huffington Post picked up and about joining the I Got Fired club and what you should do when you get fired. And in fact, yesterday I had a friend of mine text me. It said, thanks for the article. I just joined the I Got Fired club. So that your article has been very helpful to me. So, it's been able to help other people as well. My experience going through that, though, when I'm 31 and when I receive the news that they're not going to renew my contract, I'm not thinking that, boy, this is going to be a blessing.
And so you're young. And by the way, for the listener, I will we'll track down that blog post that Jamy mentioned and include that in the action plan. So jimharshawjr.com/action if you want to grab that PDF. And so, Jamy, you're young, you fail, you learn, you go on to success. Can you share with the listener one action item that they can take in the next 24 to 48 hours that can help them start moving towards their goals?
I think kind of one of the things we talked about earlier is what's important now. Figure out what is most important to you right now, or what's most important to you, period. And then break down that goal into bite-sized pieces. You mentioned weight loss. You've mentioned, other things that might be a goal. Well, whatever that goal is, break it down into bite-sized pieces. And what can I do today to get a little bit better and to move forward to this goal? And, for me, if my goal is so much in revenue as a speaker, or I want to write, probably a better one is I'm finishing up another book. And as you write these books, you don't just sit down and say, all right, I'm going to write 150 pages or 150 or a 200 page book. You have to break it up. All right, maybe you're going to write a certain chapter, or maybe you're going to do research today. And so in the next 24 to 48 hours, what you can do is take what's your goal? What's the most important thing you want to be doing? Or what direction are you headed? And then how can I break that down maybe into a week, 7 days or 5 days of manageable activities that will help me get further towards that goal. And as I've helped coach some people in writing books themselves, one of the biggest things that stops us from getting started is us. We keep coming up with reasons, or man, I can't write a book. Well, no, you can't write a book maybe, but you can certainly, or you can't write a book right now today, but you can certainly write a chapter, or you can write a blog piece that then will turn into a chapter eventually. So you can do some bite-sized pieces.
And how about a tool or a tactic, Jamy, that maybe you use? Maybe it's a supplement, maybe it's an app, maybe it's some kind of technology that you use to get a lot done. You're a busy guy, you've got a family, you travel, you coach, you consult. I mean, how do you get it all done? Is there a technology or a tool or a tip or a tactic that you could share with us?
Well, one of the things that I found, I like Canva, and Canva.
Yeah, I love that.
And that might on the surface seem like, well, that's not that great of a app or a tool. But I was spending so much time trying to reinvent the wheel for like memes and graphics and book covers and things like that. And I'm trying to do it in Word, or I'm trying to figure out, how to do it in PageMaker, or, all those kinds of things. And I'm like, when I found Canva, it was like a blessing. It was like this weight lifted off my shoulder. And Canva, it's not, perfect, certainly, but man, I have cut my time so much in designing some stuff when I'm trying to design some graphics.
Yeah, I have no eye for design, and whenever I found Canva, it's just it's been really helpful for somebody like myself. So check that out. I'll have the link for that in the action plan. Again, jimharshawjr.com/action. Jamy, can you share with the listener how they can find you, follow you, etc.?
Yeah, the best way is probably just go to coachbechler.com. There they can get my podcast, listen to my Success is a Choice podcast. They can download. We have 6 free ebooks from all different topics. They can also find my book, The Leadership Playbook, and my new book, Building Champions. They can find some speaker clips and my blogs there as well. So coachbechler.com. They can also find me at Twitter at Coach Bechler. We try to put out some positive content. We try not to be too negative. Try not to get down in the mud and wrestle in the mud. We try to throw out positive stuff and try to add value to our audience.
Excellent. Thank you, Jamy. And for the listener, we're going to have all the links, tools, tips, tactics, everything that Jamy shared with us here today in the action plan. That's jimharshawjr.com/action. Jamy, thank you so much for making time to come on the show.
Jim, I appreciate your time. Keep doing a good work with your podcast. Thank you.
Likewise with you and your podcast as well. And for the listener, until next time, take the time to get clear on your goals and embrace failure as a stepping stone on your path to success. Don't forget what I talked about before the interview. If you want to find balance, clarity, and focus, take the next step and go to jimharshawjr.com/apply. Space on my calendar is very limited, so claim your spot now. jimharshawjr.com/apply.